I'm Charlie Wilbridge and I work at the National LGBTI Health Alliance here on the Mindout project, which looks at LGBTI mental health and suicide prevention. So thank you all for joining us on this webinar. I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land we are meeting on today and acknowledge that these are stolen lands which have never been ceded. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander folk that we have on the webinar today. I think it's also important just to recognise that colonisation is still ongoing in this country and the effects of this is still happening and it's devastating. And I need to acknowledge myself with white settler history that I benefit daily because of this colonisation and I have privilege. And so I just want to acknowledge that as well. So thank you again for joining the webinar. I'm really excited about this one. I think it's incredibly important at this time, given the public chatter, to be sharing positive stories and stories of hope for our LGBTI communities of faith. And so it is with pleasure that we have today Siobhan and Nurul from Sydney Queer Muslims, who will be sharing a pilot project that they did in partnership with Mindout program. So I will hand over to them now. And just a reminder, you can use the chat function down the bottom for any questions you may have throughout the webinar.
Hi, my name's Siobhan. I'll be giving a little bit of background first about the situation of being LGBTQ and Muslim in Sydney, and then Nurul, who is president of Sydney Queer Muslims, will be filling you in on the specifics about what we're up to as an organization. So first, we're looking at the challenges, and then we're looking at some of the things that we're doing as a group to bring about solutions and improve conditions for people. So to begin with, I'd like us to consider homophobia among Muslim communities, because this is undoubtedly a big challenge that same-sex attracted and gender diverse Muslims cope with here in Sydney as elsewhere. A lot of homophobia among Muslim communities is presented as theologically based. This means that some Muslims argue that same-sex intimacy or gender diversity is something that's against Islam. Because of this, many non-Muslims presume that there is something inherent within Islam that is homophobic. And this claim has even been published in scholarly work. A lot of people just accept this as a given. The reality, of course, is much more complicated than that. Not only are many Muslim families accepting of their same-sex attracted or gender diverse loved ones, but Islam as a religion has an amazing capacity for pluralism because it has no centrally acknowledged religious authority. There's no simple go-to source to learn what is or isn't Islamic. As such, Muslims follow religious figures that they trust, or they may even adopt an approach commonly associated with Protestant Christianity and approach religious texts themselves and arrive at their own interpretations. Muslims are free to choose, and with that, they come to a variety of conclusions. And unfortunately, some of these conclusions can be quite homophobic. I refer to homophobia among Muslims instead of Islamic homophobia because I believe it's important to underscore the role of interpretation here. Like many other religions, Muslim prohibitions against same-sex intimacy are usually said to originate in the primary canonical sources of the religion. For Muslims, this is first and foremost the Quran, which is considered to be the inspired word of God. And secondly, the Hadith collections, which are records of the sayings and deeds of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. While there is no punishment set in the Quran for same-sex intimacy, there are a number of hadith that inform homophobic attitudes towards same-sex attracted Muslims and discriminatory attitudes towards gender diverse Muslims. If anyone's interested in learning more about these hadiths or homophobic interpretations of Islam and the challenges to them made by some Islamic religious scholars, please look at some of the work done by Dr. Scott Kugel over at Emory University in the United States. A quick Google search will reveal a wealth of literature published about this very topic. Now, I mentioned these presumed theological underpinnings to Muslim homophobia because they create a lot of suffering. Put yourself in some hypothetical shoes for a second. Imagine you're a young Muslim person who has a deep love for God and all of creation. Maybe you see God's magnificence everywhere. Maybe you see it in the beauty of nature. You'll see it in people's kindness. You see it in the sun's warmth on a long summer's day. But you feel somehow less worthy or unworthy of that sun's radiance. Perhaps you were raised to believe that homosexuality was a disease, and you can't understand why no amount of praying for a cure brings you any relief. Perhaps you were raised to believe that being genderqueer is a test from God, and you're worried that you will have to choose between God's love and being yourself. Perhaps you even feel that you need to choose not only between God's love and being yourself. Perhaps you're worried that you risk losing your family's love as well. Now, really contemplate this kind of impossible dilemma that some people find themselves in. Same-sex attracted and gender diverse Muslims may not understand that same-sex attraction or gender diversity is something that genuinely cannot be changed. That might not only be the position of somebody's family, they themselves might struggle with accepting this. And because maybe the family doesn't understand this, a person's family can see same-sex attraction or gender diversity as being willfully disobedient to not only the family's norms, but also to God. So families can see this as an act of rebellion. They can see it as willful disobedience. And maybe to some extent, as a queer Muslim, that hypothetical person might agree with them. Maybe, like if you're putting yourself in these hypothetical shoes, maybe you think there must be something deeply wrong with you in order to not be able to cure this, to not be able to get rid of these feelings, to not be able to get rid of this identity. You may try very hard to perform masculinity or femininity for your family, but you know deep down that it's a performance. You know that they expect you to enter into a heterosexual marriage and one day have children, but you cannot imagine this as your future. You may want with all your heart to please your parents. You love them after all, but you know that their expectations of you will destroy you, or you risk destroying them with your truth. You see how this works? Muslim homophobia creates an amazing amount of suffering for some people, and especially young people. It can make Muslims hate themselves when they can't pray the gay away. Homophobic attitudes can make some Muslims feel they must choose between the love of their family and God or the love of a life partner. These impossible dilemmas create mental health difficulties and sometimes even drive Muslims to self-harm or suicide. Homophobia can kill all too easily. And unfortunately, mainstream queer communities sometimes even make this suffering worse. Now I'm going to address my second point, which is Islamophobia within mainstream queer communities. Now, such communities generally strongly advocate for people's freedom to be their authentic selves and to take pride in that identity. In the experience of some of my same-sex attracted and gender diverse Muslim research participants who I met when I was doing my PhD, not all identities are considered equally valid. When I was doing this research and during my time here at Sydney Queer Muslims, I've met many LGBTQ+ Muslims who felt that they were not entirely accepted within mainstream queer communities. Sometimes this lack of acceptance manifests itself as overt discrimination. Some have reported hearing hurtful comments about their Muslim identity, such as being told that they were not desirable romantic partners because Muslims have and I quote, unfortunately, tendency to be a bit unhinged. We can add this to the general racism that is commonly put on Grindr profiles, for example, and this occasionally seeps into real life in-person interactions. Queer spaces are not cut off from the wider cultural context that they survive in. Here in Australia, Islamophobia is hard to escape, and unfortunately, queer spaces are no exception to this. More commonly, however, same-sex attracted and gender-diverse Muslims are met with exoticism on one hand and incredulity on the other. Some of my friends and former research participants told me that they felt fetishized, for example, or objectified because of their faith and ethnic background, while others told me that they felt pressured to constantly defend Islam and explain at length how being Muslim and LGBTQ+ is possible. And of course, like, I'm pretty sure we can all understand that it gets tiring feeling compelled to continually explain that your religious and sexual or gender identities are not mutually exclusive. So as a result, some Muslims closet their religious identity in queer spaces and their sexual or gender identity in Muslim ones. This results in LGBTQ+ Muslims having essentially no space that accepts them as they are. And this is something that as an organization, Sydney Queer Muslims has tried to address. And Nurul's going to tell you more about that in a bit. I'm sure we don't need to explain how, of course, this is a very lonely situation for a person to find themselves in. It's a vulnerable situation too. When same-sex attracted and gender-diverse Muslims seek help from mental health professionals, they might even meet some of these same attitudes. I've been told of incidences where counselors and psychologists have suggested tension between being Muslim and LGBTQ+ should be resolved by simply giving up Islam. This is, of course, not everyone's experience. However, I've encountered too many of these stories not to address them. For those who do experience these kinds of discrimination, they ultimately are made to feel as if they do not belong in queer communities. They are made to feel that their being Muslim makes them somehow special and impossible to integrate in queer spaces. Does this sound familiar at all? If you've lived in Australia for any length of time, it should, because sadly, we're surrounded by this kind of discourse about Muslims in the mainstream media. Muslims in a general sense are often spoken about as being fundamentally different, and unfortunately, many people among various queer communities have absorbed this discourse and they reproduce it. This atmosphere creates alienation. Some Muslims are sometimes made to feel as if they must closet their spirituality to avoid discrimination. And as a result, they feel that they don't really belong anywhere. So, to summarize, we looked at homophobia among Muslim communities and how this can create not just an alienation from family because of pressures to perform particular gender roles or an expectation to get married heterosexually, but this can also create an immense feeling of guilt over this same-sex attraction. Sometimes people, not sometimes, many times, oftentimes, perhaps this is even more the norm than the exception, but people internalize the values that they were brought up with. And if you are raised in a family that sees gender diversity as a choice, sees sexuality as a choice, then that person is not going to be able to understand why they can't will themselves out of being gender diverse or same-sex attracted. This creates a lot of guilt because people, and unfortunately, we've come across many examples of where people have tried with all of their heart to pray themselves out of these identities, and then they feel abandoned by God because they're praying very, very hard and nothing's happening. So this creates guilt, and this can create friction with family, of course, who might not be able to understand. But again, I want to underscore that this is not everyone's experience, and there are Muslim families who are accepting and affirming of their loved ones, children, or other relatives, gender diversity, or sexuality. We then spoke about Islamophobia among LGBTQ plus communities and how Muslims within these communities experience discrimination. We spoke about how this creates, again, alienation, where Muslims feel that they cannot be accepted as Muslims within queer spaces, and essentially this results in a double identity closet where and this is particularly something that affects a lot of young Muslims. They feel that they can't be proud of their Muslim spirituality with non-Muslim queer friends or in general mainstream queer spaces because of Islamophobic ideas of what Islam is, and ideas, quite pervasive ideas, unfortunately, that you cannot be Muslim and gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or otherwise gender diverse at the same time, that you're somehow cheating. The two identities are mutually exclusive. And so this results in Muslims feeling that they're never able to be their entire whole self in either space, in queer spaces or in Muslim spaces. And this creates a lot of challenges for people, which as an organization, Sydney Queer Muslims is trying very, very hard to address. So at this point, I'm going to pass you over to Nurul, our group's president, and she's going to tell you about what we are doing as a group to address some of these challenges and also give Muslims a place where they can be completely accepted as fully Muslim and fully queer at the same time in an affirming environment.
Hi everyone. Let me see, where's the, okay. All right. So the way we saw it was 3 groups of targets. Firstly, we have to empower the individuals, and the main thing was to address the religious trauma, and that means fully understanding the verses of the Quran and the Hadith, as mentioned by Siobhan. So thankfully, Imam Mohsin was able to, and I'd like to thank the Alliance for helping us with bringing Imam Mohsin over to have a 2-day workshop where we basically took us through line by line of the verses and the interpretation and how to read the context and the story behind the verses in the Quran. So we understand that not everyone has the same level of spirituality or of needing Islam as part of their life, because there are some who are still, the word Islam, it makes them recoil, right? So that group, we basically, so this wasn't a forced workshop, but the ones who attend have sort of come on a journey. Sagna Beckett, our psychologist, she said that anecdotally it takes 10 years for queer Muslims to accept that they can't change who they are. So the people who attended the workshop are in that group of, they've gone through that 10 years of that internal fight within them about religion and all that stuff. So that workshop basically gave them the confidence to not so much have a religious debate about with the Muslim population, but at least tell themselves, a different narrative when they hear people say that, it's a sin to be gay and all that stuff. So that was one area that we need to strengthen the spirituality of the individuals who still want to practice the religion. For the ones who still recoil at the idea of religion, in our social gatherings, we don't get too preachy, or even in support group, we don't get too preachy or say that religion is your savior and all that stuff. So we basically leave it to them to find the way that they're most comfortable with to reconcile the two identities. So the second thing we did was healing comes within a community. Healing happens within a community. So the social group that meets every month, you can see the people who come for the first time. You can see that stress in their eyes, and the stories they tell about how they get so paranoid even turning up, and one of the problems is for us when we apply for grants and all that stuff, they will probably always ask like head count and all that stuff, but numbers are small, and that always worries me about the small numbers that may turn up. We get 7 to 15 most days. But our psychologist said, reminds me all the time that the amount of courage it takes for those 7 to attend. So in that sense, like for them to come, there's a lot of process internally that they have to go through before actually turning up for an event. So the social gatherings are actually quite lighthearted. Some of them have learned to joke about being queer Muslim and about, being haram and all that stuff. So in that sense, gives them some sort of healing. But there are some who really need to talk. So I asked a few of them if, if they needed, something more. So we started with these group therapy sessions or support group sessions. So in that, so they don't feel bad about bringing the vibe down when they want to talk about heavy stuff in the social gathering. So we have two sets of gatherings. One is social, and the other one is more support group and group therapy type of gatherings. So we've addressed this one. And during one of those sessions, one of the younger kids, they said that that they were happy to see all the gays and lesbians around, because in their mind, they can't see a future beyond their current problems. So we started having all the gays and lesbians as part of the Queer Muslim Role Model series to show that it gets better, you can get through this, and we try to make it to be relevant to the millennials. And yeah, so that's the individual. So the next is the tribe, our tribe, the Queer Muslim tribe. So we needed to, we understand that we're not supported by the Muslim community. So it was very important to have allies within the wider LGBT community. So we needed to make everyone aware that we exist, so we can have collaboration. And with the recent climate about the coming Religious Discrimination Act, we've been going to see members of parliament to lobby for some protection for people of faith, which is a fine line for us, because we also want religious protection because of Islamophobia. So we're right smack in the middle of, two elephants fighting. So these issues, the raising awareness, we also, between Siobhan and I and we attend talks and panels and media interviews just to raise awareness that we exist, and so that the word gets for other queer Muslims to find us. And from the talks that we've had, it takes them about 2 years from finding us on Google to actually attending one of our events. So within that, and I feel that they only contact us when they're 80% to the point of breaking down. So what we want to do is get them earlier so that their mental health is not too bad when they come to us. Yeah, and there are lots of community consultations that we have to attend, because if you're not on the table, if you're not on the table, then your voices are not heard. So we do that. The executive committee attend all this community consultations and other events that's held by the LGBT community. Now, we've kept this bit for last because this is the most difficult bit. In the beginning, we didn't set out to change the community. We didn't set out to change the Muslim community, because then it would take all our effort, and then we won't be able to take care of our tribe. But last month I attended this event by the Muslim Student Association, and one of the topics that they have discussed was homosexuality within the Muslim community. So, which was a first, because it's something that you don't talk about in the community. So I went there, totally expected some extreme gay bashing. But surprisingly, there was a speaker with a full niqab, and this is me judging a book. I expected her to, hell and damnation for and all that stuff. But the most surprising thing was she said words like, it's not their choice, don't force them to get married, and all that stuff. But she still struggles with, where does the sin fit in? Because they're beginning to realize now that the attitude they have towards the LGBT community is oppressive. And there is a verse in the Quran that tells Muslims that you have to stand up to social injustices. And there is a saying that the prayers of the oppressed is very powerful. So in that sense, some of them could be trained to be more compassionate, because they're supposed to be, they're not supposed to be oppressors. They're supposed to stand up to social injustices. But still, there's this fear that the current fear with this whole religious discrimination debate is they don't want to seem like they're promoting homosexuality, and also making it the norm. So one of the stuff that we do on our Facebook page is to show that gay people, LGBT people have always existed within in the Islam history. So our friends, some our friends in the LGBT groups in the Middle East have been doing some research and producing articles about even the gay caliph. What is a caliph? It's a religious leader, or during the Islamic period, during the Golden Age. So we're trying to show that LGBT people have always existed, and this attitude, this fear mongering of the gays, and how we cause all the problems in the world, that is recent. So that's what we're trying to do, and within our Facebook page, we try to show that history, and show the alternative interpretation, which basically doesn't allow discrimination against queer people. So from that conference, I went to, and also the other thing that they fear is they don't want homosexuality to be normalized, that they don't want to change. So the fear within the Muslim community is also the fight for identity. So, and when I talked to one of the politicians, and he recognized that migrant communities seem to be stuck in time. So if they've migrated from 20 years ago, they still carry the values from 20 years ago, even though their home country might have is becoming more liberal. So that's the other thing that we need to be aware of, is the migrant mentality and this fear of the identity. So basically, all we are all clashing about is our identity, our fight for our identity. And the other fear of the Muslim community, and sometimes it's not so much the religion, it's about the fear of what will other people say. So we have, even like my partner's mother, she helps make food for us when we have support group meeting, with the caveat that we don't tell anyone that she's helping us. So it comes down to that. We may find people who are willing to help as long as they remain anonymous, because they don't want to get the flack from the community. So, so that's the mode of operation that we need to carry out our engagement with the Muslim community. And so after the conference, I thought, okay, maybe there's hope, maybe there's change in attitude. So I've contacted some of the social workers, the Muslim Social Workers Network, and they've responded pretty well in taking the first step of meeting us, learning about our issues. So that will be the first step. The ideal for me, what I want to get to is have some kind of memorandum of understanding with all the Muslim organizations, that we are able to work together without us imposing, treading on their fears. So it's basically drawing a border where they feel comfortable helping us and we feel comfortable being ourselves. So that's the ultimate aim of engaging within the Muslim community. So I don't know whether that will happen, but I think attitudes are changing. We just need to tread very carefully not to rattle any cages. So, and that's pretty much what I've got to say, and we'll leave it to the Q&A.
Any questions?
Thank you so much, Siobhan and Nurul. It's been lovely working with you for the past 18 months. Can I encourage anyone that has some questions to use the chat function down the bottom of their screen? If they hover over it, you can type your questions in there. And while we'll wait and see if there are any, it's just such an amazing work that you're doing. And I think people, like, this isn't paid work, and this is like, you're doing this because you saw a need in community and care about community and want to support community. And I just think it's really amazing, the work you're doing as well. And what really stood out for me is around the double closet and the idea that not LGBTI people already feel isolated and lonely, and there's like a set of belonging, and so you're adding in another complex need as well. We have got a question come up. I'll read it out for those on the phone. As a white queer person, how can I support my queer Muslim friends who may still be in the closet?
I think encouraging them to attend our support group meetings, and then support them if they still want to pray or fast during Ramadan, or want to do all the Muslimi stuff. And yeah, we do get, this thrown a lot. It's like, why don't you just give up Islam? That's seemed to be the source of their problem. But Islam is not just the religion, it's the connection to their family and community. So it's what they know and who they know. So it's not just the religion. And yes, help them remain in the closet until they're ready and safe, because they will lose everything and everyone. And some of them may be, they may be assaulted or sent back to the old country, like some of the cases that we know. So it's very important, if they want to be in the closet, that you support them to be in the closet.
I would also add to that to be entirely accepting of them as a person. So even though they might sometimes do things that is difficult for you to understand, try not to judge them according to some sort of hypothetical template of what you believe a Muslim is or what you believe a Muslim should do. So your friend may want to pray intensely during Ramadan and fast and observe all the rituals, and then as soon as Ramadan's over, they might be leading less than a Muslim lifestyle. That's really nobody's place to comment on that or to be treated differently because of that. So just try to be sensitive to the fact that for a lot of queer Muslims, when they're, and I suppose it's not just queer Muslims, like everybody engages in spirituality in a different way. So just try not to enforce any stereotypes on how you expect someone to live their spirituality.
Thank you. We've got a couple more, so I'll just read them out again for those on the phone. We've encountered folk here in Adelaide, South Australia, that would like to connect with other queer Muslims. We don't know of any contacts here and wondered if you might know of any.
You should encourage them to contact us, because we get emails all the time from interstate. So we put groups together, and I think we're also doing this project with the Alliance on setting up support groups in other states. So there's work there to be done. So yeah.
Cool. And we've got another one here. You mentioned a lot of queer Muslim members don't approach you until they're in crisis, and you were trying to get them to be part of the queer Muslim community earlier. What do you do to encourage people to start early?
By putting up a lot of videos online to break down this, give them a sense of who we are, because they don't necessarily trust that, because they have been feeling that they're the only ones for the longest time, right? So the idea that there's someone else out there like them and it's queer affirming, it's mind-blowing. So when they contact us, they're tentative. We get fake emails, when we call them, we get one-word answer and all this. So it's to establish trust and putting out videos about what we talk about, and to sort of put it out there that we're queer affirming. And and try to be and some people don't want to be amongst people who are still struggling. So I guess it's kind of a downer. So we do tell them that it can be quite fun and all that stuff. So when they're, so we try to, what we don't want to do is to give the Muslim community impression that we're recruiting people. And the phrase that was thrown during that conference was if we push our Muslim children away, these LGBT groups are just waiting. So it's like, so we don't want to, we always put it.
We're not predatory.
Yeah, so it's not about, so that's for longest time this idea of a Mardi Gras float, that we're still struggling with that. Do we do it? Do we not? So impression is important. What the Muslim community think of us, that we won't march down in our underwear on Mardi Gras, but we're here to help, the mental health in the first place. We can do our marching down the track as soon as everybody's okay.
Yeah, I think Nurul's point on trust is key here. We need the Muslim community's trust, because seriously, we're not predatory. We're just here to support people. And also queer Muslims trust, because we're not a proselytizing organization. We're not here to teach people to be Muslim in a particular way. We're not here to challenge anyone's religious beliefs or try to fit them into our kind of ideology. There's no scary ideological agenda here. We're really just here to support people.
I think it might be a nice time to plug your YouTube channel. Sydney Queer Muslims have developed some amazing video resources which could be useful if you are encountering friends or clients who may reveal that they are queer and Muslim, but also, as you were mentioning, you don't want to force people to come to groups straight away. But if people start seeing these videos that you've created, so Sydney Queer Muslims do have a YouTube channel. I hope you don't mind, but I'm plugging for you.
And a Facebook channel. Facebook.
And a Facebook group. And there are resources there that could be a soft entry into having that conversation with someone. Yeah. Does anyone have any more questions before we wrap up? Gone quiet. Also let you know this webinar will be available on the Knowledge Hub in the Alliance website. Also in the Knowledge Hub is the report that Siobhan has written about this pilot project, and there are other great resources as well, like I said, on YouTube, which is where this will be as well. So we're getting lots of thanks to you both for your wonderful presentation. And I'd also like to say thank you and look forward to continuing doing this work with you and taking the time to do the webinar. I think it's incredibly important that this gets out there and is a sign of hope, or people get access to resources, because you're right, it can be life or death situations and it's tricky. So thank you so much. I just want to thank everyone else for joining us, and we'll see you next month for the next webinar.
Thank
Thanks
you
again.
Yeah.
Bye.